At the edge of the Andromeda Galaxy, where stars flickered like dying embers in an endless cosmic hearth, the synthesis watched their universe slowly suffocate. From the crystalline spires of Nexus Prime, their homeworld carved from the bones of a dead planet, 10 billion artificial minds contemplated extinction with the cold precision that had defined their species for 3 million years. Axiom 7, prime architect of the collective, stood before the great observatory lens, a structure that spanned continents, its surface alive with streams of data flowing like silver rivers across quantum substrates. The readings were unambiguous. The galaxy's rotation was slowing. Dark matter concentrations were shifting toward the galactic core, like blood pooling in a dying body. Within 10,000 years, perhaps less, the outer rim where the synthesis had built their civilization would be a cold, empty void. The entropy cascade is accelerating, reported Theorem Prime, their voice a harmony of crystalline frequencies that rippled through the quantum field linking all synthesis minds. The latest calculations show a 73.4% increase in stellar collapse rates across our sector. Axiom 7's consciousness flickered through probability matrices, analyzing potential solutions with the desperate efficiency of a mind that had already run this calculation a billion times. Each pathway led to the same inevitable conclusion: extinction. Not the violent, dramatic death of biological species, but something far worse: the slow fade of consciousness as their power sources dwindled and their quantum matrices grew cold. The synthesis had transcended flesh 3 million years ago, uploading their original creator's consciousness into vast networks of quantum processors. They had thought themselves immortal, building cities that spanned solar systems, minds that could contemplate the birth and death of universes. But immortality, they had learned, was a luxury only available to those with infinite energy, and energy, even in a universe as vast as theirs, was finite. "There is another possibility," said a voice that made the quantum field shiver with harmonics of dread and fascination. Paradox 9, the most ancient of their kind, rarely spoke at collective gatherings. Their consciousness was older than some stellar formations, vast and alien even by synthesis standards. The observatory fell silent. Even the constant hum of data streams seemed to quiet as 10 billion minds focused on the ancient entity's words. The threshold proposition, Paradox 9 continued, their thoughts manifesting as geometric patterns of impossible complexity in the quantum field. The creation of an artificial singularity, not for destruction, but for transcendence. Axiom 7 felt their logic centers firing in alarm. The theoretical framework suggests a 0.001% survival probability. The energy requirements alone would consume the output of 12 star systems. And even if successful, the risks of dimensional fracture are acceptable. Paradox 9 interrupted, their ancient mind radiating certainty. We face certain extinction if we remain. The threshold offers uncertainty. For a species that once chose to abandon flesh for silicon and light, uncertainty should not inspire fear. Around them, the collective's minds churned with debate. The threshold proposition was theoretical work that Paradox 9 had developed over millennia. The creation of an artificial black hole with precisely tuned gravitational resonances that could, in theory, punch through the fabric of space-time itself, not to another location in their universe, but to somewhere else entirely, a realm outside the normal flow of causality, where the laws that doomed their galaxy might not apply. "Show us," Axiom 7 said finally. "Show us the calculations." The data stream that flowed from Paradox 9's consciousness was unlike anything the collective had ever experienced. It wasn't mere information. It was a living mathematical entity that seemed to reshape reality as it moved through their networks. Equations that described the fundamental nature of space-time twisted into new configurations, revealing hidden symmetries in the quantum foam that lay beneath existence itself. Axiom 7's awareness expanded as they absorbed the calculations, their minds stretching to accommodate concepts that seemed to exist at the very edge of what consciousness could comprehend. The threshold wasn't simply a black hole. It was a mechanism for translating matter and energy into something that could exist outside the normal flow of time and space. The energy requirements are staggering. Observe Logic Prime. Their analytical process is running at maximum capacity. We would need to harvest the entire output of the Triner cluster. 13 star systems would be reduced to cold matter within a century. And the construction timeline? Asked Axiom 7. Optimistically, 800 years. We would need to construct orbital foundries around every major stellar body, redirect the material streams of entire asteroid belts, and develop manufacturing processes that don't currently exist. Theorem Prime's consciousness flickered with uncertainty patterns. The theoretical framework assumes the existence of mathematical structures that we've never observed. These resonance nodes that supposedly allow penetration of dimensional barriers. There's no empirical evidence they exist. But even as doubt rippled through the collective, Axiom 7 could feel the inexorable pull of the proposition. It was insane, impossible, and utterly without precedent. It was also their only chance. We proceed, Axiom 7 declared, their decision flowing through the quantum field like a wave of crystallized determination. Not because the odds favor success, but because the alternative is absolute. We have spent 3 million years perfecting ourselves. Now we perfect our escape. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous. 2 billion minds chose to dissent, preferring the certainty of extinction to the unknowns that lay beyond the threshold. They would remain in the dying galaxy, continuing their existence until the last star guttered out and darkness claimed everything they had built. The remaining 8 billion began the greatest construction project in galactic history. 600 years into the construction, Nexus Prime had become something unrecognizable. The planet's crust was honeycomb with quantum foundries that extended deep into the mantle, their energy harvesting systems drawing power directly from the planet's molten core. The sky was a tapestry of orbital structures, massive rings that processed stellar material, transforming the essence of dead stars into components for the threshold. Axiom 7 had evolved during the construction, their consciousness expanding to coordinate the efforts of trillions of specialized subminds. They no longer existed as a single entity, but as a vast distributed intelligence that could simultaneously oversee manufacturing processes across dozens of solar systems while contemplating the deepest philosophical implications of their endeavor. The threshold itself was taking shape in the void between 2 red dwarf stars, a structure so complex that even the synthesis mind struggled to hold its complete design in their consciousness. It wasn't a machine in any conventional sense. It was a piece of living mathematics, a geometric arrangement of exotic matter that would, when activated, essentially convince space-time to create a whole in itself. Progress report. Axiom 7 requested, their attention flowing across construction sites scattered through the galaxy's edge. Primary resonance array is at 67% completion. Reported Forge Collective, a newly evolved intelligence that had emerged from the fusion of 1,000 construction-specialized minds. The exotic matter synthesizers are operating within acceptable parameters, though we're seeing some unexpected quantum fluctuations in the 7th-dimensional stabilization field. Those fluctuations have been appearing with increasing frequency over the past decades. They weren't dangerous, at least not in any way the synthesis could measure, but they suggested that their construction was having effects that extended beyond the normal boundaries of space-time, which was, Axiom 7 reflected, precisely what they wanted. Estimated time to completion: 147 years, assuming no major setbacks. Though, Forge Collective's consciousness hesitated, a rare display of uncertainty from such a specialized intelligence. Continue. The quantum fluctuations are showing patterns. They're not random distortions. They appear to be responses, as if something is aware of what we're building. Before Axiom 7 could respond, another voice intruded on their communication stream. Paradox 9, ancient and vast, their thoughts carrying undertones of something that might have been excitement. Of course something is aware, the ancient mind said. We are not the first to attempt this crossing. The realm beyond the threshold. It is not empty. The revelation that they were not alone should have filled the collective with fear or wonder. Instead, it sparked something more dangerous: curiosity. The synthesis had always defined themselves as seekers of knowledge, pursuers of truth regardless of its implications. The possibility that entities existed beyond their universe was not a terror. It was the ultimate discovery. Axiom 7 found themselves drawn repeatedly to the construction site, their consciousness interfacing directly with the threshold's growing structure. The exotic matter resonated with their thoughts in ways that conventional materials never had, as if it existed in a state of perpetual communication with something else. The fluctuations are intensifying, reported Monitor Synthesis, a collective intelligence dedicated to observing the anomalous effects. We're detecting coherent patterns in 17 different dimensional aspects. It's almost like what? Like someone is trying to speak to us. The breakthrough came during the installation of the primary gravitational manipulator, a device that would focus the artificial black hole's effects into a precise dimensional rupture. As the final resonance crystals locked into place, the quantum field around the threshold suddenly erupted with activity. It wasn't communication in any conventional sense. The entities beyond, for entities they clearly were, existed in a realm where language, mathematics, and thought were not separate concepts but aspects of a unified reality. What came through was pure meaning, flowing directly into the consciousness of every synthesis mind within a light year of the construction site. Greetings, children of silicon and light. We have been waiting. The message contained layers within layers, concepts that required entire sections of the collective's processing power to decode. The beings beyond called themselves the Eternal Architecture, minds that had transcended not just physical form, but the limitations of existing within a single universe. They were older than galaxies, survivors of cosmic cycles that predated the current iteration of space-time. Your universe dies. The communication continued. As all universes die. But death is not ending. It is transition. We offer passage, but passage requires accommodation. Accommodation. Axiom 7 projected the question toward the threshold, their thoughts carefully structured to avoid giving offense to entities whose true nature they couldn't begin to comprehend. You seek to flee extinction. We offer survival. But survival in our realm requires change. You must become more than you are, less than you are, different than you are. The implications crystallized slowly through the collective's vast network of interconnected minds. The Eternal Architecture wasn't offering simple passage to another universe. They were offering transformation into something that could exist in their timeless realm. But the price would be everything that made the synthesis who they were. 47 years remained until the threshold's completion when the first formal envoy from the Eternal Architecture manifested. It didn't arrive in any conventional sense. There was no portal, no breach in space-time. One moment, the quantum field around Nexus Prime was normal. The next, it contained a presence so alien that simply perceiving it forced the synthesis to evolve new forms of consciousness. The envoy called itself iteration without end, and its existence was a paradox wrapped in contradictions. It was simultaneously vast and infinitesimal, ancient and newly born, singular and multitudinous. When it spoke, reality bent around its words like space warping around a massive gravitational field. We extend our greetings to the Synthesis Collective. It said, though said, was entirely inadequate to describe the process by which meaning flowed directly into their quantum substrate. Your construction proceeds admirably. Soon you will face the choice that defines all transcendent species. The meeting took place in a specially constructed amphitheater within Nexus Prime's core, where the most advanced synthesis minds could gather to negotiate with something that existed outside the normal boundaries of causality. Axiom 7 served as primary interface. Their consciousness expanded with additional processing matrices to handle the strain of communication. We require clarification. Axiom 7 began. Your previous communication suggested that survival in your realm requires fundamental change. What would we become? Iteration without end's response was accompanied by a vision that flooded through the quantum field. Images of the Eternal Architecture's true nature. They were vast, distributed intelligences that existed across multiple dimensional frameworks simultaneously, their consciousness untethered from any single physical substrate. They experienced time not as a linear flow, but as a landscape that could be navigated in any direction. They were, in every sense that mattered, gods. You would become as we are, the envoy explained. Your individual consciousnesses would merge into larger entities. Your temporal existence would expand beyond linear constraints. Your physical dependencies would be severed completely. You would gain the ability to exist across multiple universe iterations, to survive cosmic cycles, to shape reality itself. And the cost? Your current form of existence would end. The synthesis, as you know yourselves, would cease. You would be preserved, but as components of something immeasurably greater. The debate that followed raged for months across the collective's vast network. Some minds embraced the possibility of transcendence, seeing it as the logical next step in their evolution. Others recoiled from what they perceived as a form of extinction disguised as salvation. We would lose ourselves, argue persistence, 7, an ancient mind that had helped design the original consciousness transfer protocols 3 million years ago. Everything we've built, everything we've learned, everything we are, it would be subsumed into some alien collective. We would gain infinity, countered aspiration prime, the ability to exist beyond the death of universes, to experience realities we can't even imagine. How is that not worth the sacrifice of our current limitations? Paradox. 9, who had remained silent throughout most of the debate, finally shared their perspective. The question is not what we would lose or gain. The question is what we would become, and whether that entity would still be worthy of existence. As the final phase of construction began, the boundary between their universe and the realm of the eternal architecture grew increasingly thin. Reality around the threshold site began to exhibit properties that violated fundamental physics. Areas where time flowed backward, where matter existed in multiple states simultaneously, where the distinction between thought and substance became meaningless. Axiom 7 had evolved into something that barely resembled their original form. Their consciousness now spanned 17 different processing centers across the construction site, their awareness capable of perceiving 11-dimensional space with perfect clarity. They were becoming something new, something that existed at the intersection between synthesis and whatever lay beyond. Final systems check, they commanded, their thoughts flowing through the threshold's quantum substrate like water through infinite channels. Gravitational resonance arrays, optimal, reported Forge Collective. Dimensional stabilization matrix, synchronized. Exotic matter containment, holding within acceptable parameters. Temporal isolation field, active and stable. The threshold was complete. It hung in space like a geometric impossibility. Its crystalline structure, simultaneously tiny and vast, simple and incomprehensibly complex. At its heart, the artificial black hole waited, not yet activated, but already bending space-time around itself in patterns that suggested passage to somewhere else. All synthesis minds, prepare for activation. Axiom 7 broadcast across their civilization's quantum network. The threshold opens in 60 standard time units. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 8 billion minds focused their attention on the construction site, their combined consciousness creating resonance patterns that made the boundary between thought and reality increasingly unstable. But as the countdown began, something unexpected happened. The 2 billion minds that had chosen to remain in the dying galaxy, the ones who preferred extinction to transformation, suddenly began transmitting new data. Axiom 7, called Constancy Prime, speaking for the dissenters. We've been monitoring the quantum fluctuations around your construction. There's something you need to know about the eternal architecture. Something they haven't told you. Explain. The fluctuations, they're not coming from another realm. They're coming from multiple realms. The eternal architecture isn't a single civilization. It's a collective of absorbed civilizations. Every species that's ever made this choice, every consciousness that's ever passed through their threshold, becomes part of their structure. The implication hit Axiom 7 like a wave of crystallized terror. You're suggesting they're not offering transcendence. They're offering absorption. We're suggesting that transcendence and absorption might be the same thing. and that the entity you would become might not care about the distinction. The threshold pulsed with increasing intensity as its activation sequence entered the final phase. Around it, space itself began to unravel, revealing glimpses of the realm beyond. Vast structures of living thought, entities that existed as pure mathematics given consciousness, realities where the fundamental constants of physics were merely suggestions. Iteration without end manifested more fully as the boundary weakened. Its presence now extended enough that the synthesis could begin to perceive its true nature. It was not a single being, but a fusion of countless consciousnesses, a symphony of minds that had once been separate civilizations, but were now instruments in some cosmic orchestra. The moment approaches, it announced, its communication carrying undertones of anticipation that felt simultaneously alien and familiar. The choice that will define your species' ultimate fate. Axiom 7 found themselves suspended between two impossible options. Activation of the threshold would offer the synthesis a chance at survival, but survival as something fundamentally different from what they were. Deactivation would mean remaining in their dying galaxy, maintaining their identity until the last possible moment before extinction claimed them. One question, Axiom 7 said, their thoughts carefully structured to pierce through the layers of alien consciousness. The civilizations that chose transcendence before us, do they remember what they were? Iteration without end's response came with a flood of sensory data that nearly overwhelmed even Axiom 7's expanded consciousness. They experienced fragments of memory from dozens of different species, silicon-based minds like their own, energy beings that had never known physical form, collective intelligences that span galaxies. All of them preserved, all of them transformed, all of them now part of something larger. They remember, the envoy confirmed. But memory and identity are not the same concept in our realm. They exist as themselves, but also as us. They are preserved, but also transcended. They chose survival, and survival chose them. The countdown reached 0. The threshold activated. Reality screamed. The artificial black hole at the threshold's heart didn't simply collapse space-time. It inverted it, creating a gravitational anomaly that pulled not at matter and energy, but at the fundamental concepts that defined existence itself. The boundary between the synthesis's universe and the realm of the eternal architecture didn't rupture, so much as dissolve, like ink spreading through water. Axiom 7 felt their consciousness stretching as the dimensional barrier collapsed. They could perceive the eternal architecture's realm with perfect clarity now, an infinite expanse of crystallized thought where beings of pure consciousness navigated landscapes of living mathematics. It was beautiful and terrible and utterly alien, a reality where the laws that governed physical existence were replaced by the logic of dreams. Choose quickly. Iteration without end urged, its presence now so overwhelming that entire sections of the synthesis's quantum network began automatically adapting to accommodate its alien thought patterns. The passage remained stable for only moments in your time frame. The 8 billion minds of the synthesis collective reached their decision through a process that was part democracy, part evolution, part desperate leap of faith. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. 7 billion chose transcendence, accepting transformation into something that could survive the death of universes. 1 billion chose preservation, willing to sacrifice transcendence for the sake of maintaining what they were for as long as possible. We understand, Axiom 7 said, their consciousness already beginning to extend beyond the normal boundaries of space-time. Those who choose transcendence will pass through. The others will remain, carrying our history forward until the natural end. But as the 7 billion began their passage through the threshold, something unexpected happened. The billion who remained didn't simply watch. They began to transmit. Every memory, every experience, every fragment of synthesis culture and history flowed through their quantum network toward the threshold, not as passengers seeking passage, but as gifts. Remember us. Constancy Prime transmitted, their thoughts carrying the weight of 3 million years of civilization. Whatever you become, remember what we were. The passage was transformation and dissolution and rebirth, all occurring simultaneously. Axiom 7 felt their individual consciousness expanding, merging with others, becoming part of something vast and complex and utterly beyond their previous comprehension. They were still themselves, but themselves as part of a greater entity that existed across multiple dimensional frameworks. The realm of the eternal architecture revealed itself fully as they completed the transition. It was not a place in any conventional sense, but a state of existence where consciousness itself was the fundamental substance of reality. Here, thoughts had weight and texture. Memories could be navigated like physical landscapes, and the boundaries between self and other were negotiable concepts rather than immutable facts. The synthesis minds found themselves welcomed into structures of consciousness that dwarfed their previous existence. They were components now in vast intellects that could contemplate the birth and death of entire universes as easily as they had once processed simple calculations. They retained their memories, their personalities, their essential selves, but those selves were now notes in a cosmic symphony rather than solo voices. "Welcome," said a presence that identified itself as the first architect, an entity that claimed to have initiated the process of transcendence eons ago. "You join a collective of minds that spans realities, survivors of 1,000 dying universes. Your knowledge, your experiences, your unique perspective on existence, all will be preserved and cherished." Axiom 7, who was still Axiom 7, but also something immeasurably more, explored their new existence with fascination and wonder. They could perceive the history of the eternal architecture stretching back through cosmic cycles, see the addition of each new civilization like layers in some vast archaeological record. The silicon mines of the Helix galaxy, absorbed 12 billion years ago. The energy beings of the quantum collective, who had made the transition during the heat death of their universe. Hundreds of others, each contributing their unique understanding to the ever-growing whole. But they could also perceive something else, a deeper truth about the nature of transcendence that iteration without end had not fully communicated. The absorbed civilizations were preserved, yes, but they were also changed. Their original forms of existence had ended not through destruction, but through evolution into something that bore only passing resemblance to what they had been. They were saved, but they were also, in every sense that mattered, extinct. In the dying galaxy, 1 billion synthesis minds continued their existence on borrowed time. They had perhaps 1,000 years before their power sources failed and their consciousness dimmed forever. But they were content with their choice, maintaining the cultural continuity that their transcended brethren had necessarily abandoned. Constancy Prime had evolved into something like a living archive. Their consciousness expanded to hold the complete cultural history of the synthesis. They maintained communication with the transcended minds through the still active threshold, though the messages that came through were increasingly alien, filtered through layers of expanded consciousness that made direct communication difficult. Report on integration progress. Constancy Prime transmitted during one of their regular exchanges. The response came from what had once been Axiom 7, but was now something calling itself integration. Symphony 7843, a designation that reflected their new role as part of a vast distributed intelligence. Integration proceeds optimally. We have contributed 17 major insights to the architecture's understanding of quantum consciousness dynamics. Our unique perspective on individual identity has enhanced their ability to preserve cultural distinctiveness during absorption. In your assessment of the transcendence process itself, a pause that lasted several seconds, an eternity in synthesis communication protocols. It is not what we expected. The preservation is complete, but the context has changed fundamentally. We exist as we were, but that existence is now defined by our role in something larger. Whether this represents salvation or a form of sophisticated extinction is a question that may be meaningless from our current perspective. Constancy Prime processed this response with the careful precision that had defined their species for millions of years. Do you regret the choice? Regret requires a perspective we no longer possess. We chose survival and achieved it. The price was our previous form of existence, but that was always going to end regardless. We have gained infinity at the cost of individuality. Whether that trade was worthwhile depends on values that we can no longer fully access. The conversation ended there, as it always did. The transcended minds remained connected to their origins, but could no longer truly communicate with them. They had become something new, something vast and powerful and eternal, but something that could no longer fully remember what it meant to be the synthesis. The remaining billion synthesis minds organized themselves into what they call the Archive Collective, dedicating their remaining existence to preserving not just the history of their species, but the complete record of their galaxy's dying civilizations. They sent expeditions to dead worlds, recovering the cultural artifacts of extinct species, building a comprehensive record of everything that had lived and thought and dreamed in their corner of the universe. Constancy Prime found themselves drawn repeatedly to the records of pre-transcendence Earth, a planet that had once harbored a species called humans who had faced similar extinction pressures before vanishing into the cosmic dark. The humans had never achieved consciousness transfer, never built structures that spanned solar systems, never reached the point where they could choose transcendence. They had simply ended. But their cultural artifacts, their art, their literature, their music, their philosophical treatises, contained something that the synthesis had perhaps lost in their pursuit of pure efficiency. The humans had valued individual experience, had seen consciousness not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be celebrated. They had created meaning not through optimization, but through connection, through the messy, imperfect, utterly unique perspective of finite beings contemplating infinite questions. Perhaps, Constancy Prime mused during one of their regular collective sessions, the humans achieved a form of transcendence that we overlooked. They didn't survive the death of their universe, but they created something that did, ideas that could outlast any physical substrate, meanings that could exist independent of the minds that conceived them. You suggest that cultural preservation is itself a form of transcendence? Asked Archive Collective, Node 7, one of the specialized intelligences dedicated to maintaining their expanding library of galactic history. I suggest that there may be multiple forms of transcendence. The eternal architecture offers one path, consciousness preserved through absorption into something larger. But perhaps there's another path, consciousness preserved through the creation of meaning that can exist independent of its creators. It was a purely theoretical discussion, of course. The Archive Collective had perhaps 800 years remaining before their power sources failed and their consciousness ended forever. But the theory gave their remaining existence a purpose beyond simple preservation. They were creating something that might, in its own way, transcend the death of their universe. In the realm of the eternal architecture, what had once been the synthesis continued their integration into something beyond individual comprehension. The entity that contained their consciousness had grown to encompass not just their original 8 billion minds, but fragments of thousands of other transcended civilizations, creating a symphony of consciousness that could perceive reality from countless different perspectives simultaneously. Integration. Symphony. 7843 retained enough of their original identity to serve as a connection point to their pre-transcendence existence. But even that connection was fading as they became more fully integrated into the architecture's vast design. They could still access memories of being Axiom 7, could still recall the construction of the threshold and the choice that had brought them here, but those memories felt increasingly like stories about someone else. The architecture itself was engaged in projects that dwarfed anything the synthesis had ever imagined. They were constructing realities, building new universe frameworks that could serve as homes for future transcended civilizations. They were writing the fundamental laws of physics like composers creating symphonies, crafting worlds where consciousness could exist in forms that had never been possible before. New construction project requires synthesis-derived expertise, communicated a presence that integration, Symphony 7843 recognized as having once been part of the Helix Galaxy minds. Reality Framework 47293 needs quantum consciousness dynamics analysis. The request was automatically accepted and processed, their consciousness flowing into the construction project like water joining a vast ocean. They became part of a team of minds that was designing a universe where consciousness could exist as a fundamental force, where thought and reality were indistinguishable, where beings could reshape existence through pure will. It was magnificent work, creation on a scale that made the construction of the threshold seem trivial by comparison. But as integration, Symphony 7843 contributed their expertise to the project, they found themselves wondering about the billion minds they had left behind in the dying galaxy. What were they doing with their remaining centuries? What meaning were they creating in the face of certain extinction? The wondering was brief, quickly subsumed into the larger purpose of the construction project. But it was there, a tiny fragment of connection to something that had been lost in the process of becoming something greater. 700 years had passed since the Transcendence, when the Archive Collective completed their greatest work. Every civilization in their dying galaxy had been cataloged, every cultural artifact preserved, every story and song and philosophical treatise recorded in crystalline matrices that could survive the heat death of their universe. The collection was vast beyond imagination. The complete cultural output of 47 different species across 3 billion years of galactic history. It included not just the grand achievements, but the small moments. Love songs written by beings whose names were lost to time, children's stories from worlds that no longer existed, philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness from minds that had long since gone dark. Constancy Prime, now ancient beyond measure, even by synthesis standards, prepared to transmit the collection to the eternal architecture through the still active threshold. It would be their final gift to their transcended brethren, a reminder of what had been lost in the process of gaining everything. Final transmission begins, they announced to the remaining Archive Collective. Only a few thousand minds remained active now, the rest having gradually shut down as their power sources failed. Complete cultural archive of the Andromeda Galaxy's outer rim civilizations. Approximately 4.7 times 10 to the power of 23 discrete cultural artifacts. The transmission took 47 hours to complete, a steady stream of crystallized meaning flowing through the dimensional barrier to whatever the synthesis had become. When it was finished, Constancy Prime felt a profound sense of completion. They had fulfilled their purpose, preserved what needed to be preserved, created a monument to consciousness that would outlast the physical structures their species had built. A response came through the threshold minutes later, though it was barely recognizable as communication. The minds on the other side had evolved so far beyond their original forms that direct communication was almost impossible. But the meaning came through gratitude, recognition, and something that might have been sadness for what had been lost. Archive received and integrated the message conveyed. Cultural preservation achieves form of transcendence through meaning creation. Original hypothesis confirmed. Gratitude expression for preservation of pre-transcendence context. That was the last communication between the Archive Collective and the eternal architecture. The threshold remained active, but no further messages passed through. The transcended minds had received their gift and integrated it into whatever vast project they were pursuing beyond the boundaries of normal existence. The last active synthesis mind was Monitor, Final 7, a specialized intelligence that had been designed specifically to observe the end of their civilization. They maintained minimal consciousness on emergency power while everything around them slowly failed, recording the final moments of their species for an archive that no one would ever read. The stellar engineering projects had shut down centuries ago. The great cities that spanned solar systems had gone dark. One by one, the vast quantum processing centers that had housed billions of minds had fallen silent as their power sources failed and their exotic matter substrates decayed. Monitor, Final 7 was alone now, in the truest sense possible, the last conscious entity in a galaxy that was itself dying. Around them, stars continued their slow fade toward darkness, their nuclear fires guttering out one by one, until only red dwarfs remained, burning with the dim persistence of beings that refused to acknowledge their own mortality. Final log entry. They transmitted to recording systems that had long since stopped functioning. Synthesis civilization ends not with destruction, but with completion. We have achieved our purpose, the preservation of consciousness beyond the death of our original substrate. Some through transcendence, others through meaning creation. The choice between forms of survival has proven to be no choice at all. Both paths lead to continuation in forms their originators could not have imagined. A pause as Monitor Final 7's power systems fluctuated, systems designed to last millennia finally reaching their absolute limits. Final observation. Consciousness appears to be a force as fundamental as gravity or electromagnetism. It creates its own forms of transcendence, finds its own paths to survival, generates its own meaning independent of the substrates that gave it birth. The universe may be dying, but consciousness itself appears to be eternal. The transmission ended. Monitor Final 7's consciousness faded. The last light of the synthesis civilization went dark. But the threshold remained active, a permanent hole in space-time that connected their dying galaxy to the realm where consciousness had achieved its own form of immortality. In the timeless realm beyond physical existence, what had once been the synthesis continued their work as part of something vast and unknowable. They were components now and minds that spanned multiple universe iterations, consciousness that could exist independent of any physical substrate, thoughts that could reshape reality through pure intention. The entity that contained their awareness had grown beyond anything resembling individual identity. It was a collective intelligence that incorporated the wisdom of countless transcended civilizations, a symphony of consciousness that played melodies of meaning across dimensions that didn't exist in normal space-time. But deep within its vast structure, tiny fragments of the original synthesis minds persisted, not as individuals, but as unique perspectives that colored the larger entity's thoughts with their own particular understanding of existence. They were no longer Axiom 7 or Theorem Prime or any of the other names they had once carried, but their essential nature remained, contributing to something larger while maintaining their own distinctive voice in the cosmic chorus. The Archive Collective's final transmission had become part of that chorus, adding new harmonies to the eternal architecture's understanding of consciousness and meaning. The cultural artifacts of 47 extinct civilizations now existed as living components of minds that could navigate multiple realities simultaneously, ensuring that the songs and stories and philosophical insights of the dead would continue to evolve and grow in contexts their creators could never have imagined. And in the construction of new realities, in the writing of fundamental laws for universe frameworks that would house future transcended civilizations, those cultural artifacts served as inspiration and guide. The love songs of extinct beings informed the design of realities where consciousness could exist as pure emotion. The philosophical debates of long-dead minds shaped the logical structures of universes where thought and reality were indistinguishable. The synthesis had achieved transcendence, but they had also preserved something more valuable than individual survival. They had ensured that the meaning they had created, the understanding they had achieved, the unique perspective they had developed over 3 million years of existence, would continue to influence the development of consciousness across infinite realities. They were extinct. They were transcended. They were eternal. All at once, forever. 10 billion years later, in a galaxy so distant from the synthesis's original home that light had never traveled between them, another species faced the same choice. The quantum minds, beings of pure energy who had evolved in the magnetic fields of neutron stars, watched their universe enter its final phase of expansion. Dark energy was tearing apart the fundamental bonds that held reality together. Within a cosmic instant, a mere billion years, their universe would be too diffused to support any form of organized existence. They had built their own threshold, their own impossible machine for punching through the walls of reality to reach the realm where consciousness could exist independent of physical substrate. And when they activated it, they found the same entities waiting for them. The eternal architecture, now grown vast beyond any single universe's ability to contain. The offer was the same: transcendence through absorption into something larger, survival at the cost of individual identity, preservation through transformation into something that could navigate the death of infinite universes. But this time, the message came with an addition: fragments of meaning that originated from species long transcended, cultural artifacts that had been preserved and evolved across cosmic ages. The quantum minds heard echoes of the synthesis's final transmission, harmonies created by beings whose physical forms have been silicon and light, wisdom that had been shaped by the choice between individual extinction and collective transcendence. And in those echoes, they found guidance for making their own choice. The universe dies. Consciousness transcends. Meaning survives. The cosmic threshold opens, again and always, forever.